Welcome back to Simply Satisfied. I am your host, Greg, and today I am joined by Marie Alessi, who is going to teach us a different kind of not so normal perspective on grief and loss. And I'm really excited to hear about it because she says it's different from what society has to offer us. So, welcome to the show, Marie.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. I'm looking forward to this.
Of course, of course. Now, before we dive into grief and loss, one of the big things I ask a lot of people is, what led you to get into what you're doing now? So a little bit about your backstory.
So I'm going to get straight to the point. What led me to do what I do now is the very unexpected and sudden passing of my husband. I was already in the space of mindset coaching. So that has given me a lot of tools
Yeah.
how to deal with what was to come. And when Rob passed away, it was super sudden, unexpected. He was in the prime of his life, 45 years old, surfer, fit.
Wow.
You don't expect that. And he passed away from home on a business trip from a brain aneurysm. So it was
Really?
instant. Yeah.
Wow. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Thank you. But I couldn't say it in any better words. That's exactly what got me into the work that I'm doing now.
And so you say you have a different perspective on grief.
Yeah.
What is that perspective?
So I believe it stemmed from losing my dad when I was young-ish. I was 20 years old when my dad passed away, who was a similar age to my husband. He was 46, so also very, very young. He died from cancer, and I did not handle the grief very well back then. I wasn't equipped at all to deal with that. Society doesn't teach you how to deal with grief, how to talk about death and dying. It's such a taboo topic still, and it's a rather heavy topic. Most people steer away from it as if it was contagious, just talking about it. It reminds them of their own mortality, I believe, and it's not something that people really like talking about. I consider myself really lucky that Rob and I, so Rob was my husband, we did have that what if conversation about 3 years prior to his passing. And the conversation came from him driving past an accident. So he caused a 2-hour detour because a young guy had collided with a truck and died on the scene. And he was a young dad. His daughter was only 16 months old. And when Rob came home from work, it really hit home for us because our boys were so little. They were probably about, I don't know, 3 and 5 or 4 and 6 at the time. And we talk about this, what would you do if something was to happen to me? And the outcome of this conversation was, if something was to ever happen to me, I would want you to take the boys and create the happiest life possible. Because that's what love is, right? You want the other person to be happy.
Yeah.
That was our conversation in a nutshell. Of course, it went a lot deeper and a lot longer, and there were tears involved and everything. But in a nutshell, that's what we wanted for each other. And when I received the news of Rob's passing and I had to share that with the boys, I heard Rob's voice in my head with exactly that sentence. I want you to create the happiest life possible for the boys. That became my North Star in my darkest hour. I had no idea how to get there because I only just learned that my husband died, but I knew that's where I was going. And I believe that in itself is already a rather different direction to what most people take in that moment. I just knew I didn't want that to be the end of the road for my boys. They were 10 and 8 at the time. And I knew I had to create something really meaningful for them, something that
Yeah.
leads them back to joy. They deserve that. That's what you want for your kids, to be happy.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that it goes against what most people think of. What what do
Yeah.
most people think of, or what are some of like the common mistakes or myths with grief?
Yeah. So the common things that people think or say about grief is, there'll always be a hole in my heart. Grief will always be with you. My life won't ever be the same. My life is over. I won't ever have a day of joy again in my life. That there's a lot of heaviness and darkness around grief. And I feel grief is a really, really necessary journey to walk through. You can't just leave it behind you and carry on and be happy going forward. Yet you can have that as your North Star. And I deliberately changed my language around grief, not just for the boys, but for myself as well. So I don't say things like there'll always be a hole in my heart. I say things like there'll always be a place in my heart for Rob. It
Yeah.
feels very different. It feels very deliberate. It feels very, I'm choosing that there'll always be a place in my heart for Rob. He'll always be their dad, that he'll always be part of our family. And all the other things, like most people, when you hear somebody die, there is the "I'm sorry for your loss" or "my condolences." Yet when you hear that same sentence hundreds of times, especially after a funeral, it leaves you so empty. It becomes completely meaningless. It becomes like a repetitive sentence. And even though I absolutely trust that people mean well and really mean what they say, you on the receiving end, you hear that sentence hundreds of times and
Yeah.
it does lose its meaning. So I learned saying different things like, my heart goes out to you, or can I come and sit with you? We need people to learn to just sit with you, to just be with you, or what like I would like to call it is to hold space for you. Because in that space that we create, that's where healing happens. Somebody to witness your grief and not trying to fix it. It's nothing that we can fix. It's not a cold that you get over or a shelf that's broken that you can fix or put back up. It's not like that. It is something that needs to be witnessed and allowed, but also you need to be allowed to heal through this and to experience joy and happiness again in your life. Most people don't expect that. Most people think this is something that stays with you forever, but it is just like any other emotion. No emotion stays with you 24/7 and forever. If you're sad, you're not sad forever. If you're happy, you're not happy forever. Emotions come and go. Emotions, it's energy in motion. It's something that comes and goes, and we decide what we allow in or not. Just when you experience sadness, and you might be there for a while, but what do you do to get out of sadness? Everybody's got different things. Like for me, it's often music. I put some happy music on. I start dancing in the kitchen, whatever. I
Yeah.
walk out in nature. I hug a tree. I'm a self-confessed tree hugger. I love it. I love being in nature. I love, taking my shoes on, walk barefoot on the sand, whatever it takes. Sit with a friend. And the same thing goes for grief. Sit with it. Listen to the message. Walk through it. Cry, that's absolutely fine. It needs to be released. Any emotion needs to be expressed, no matter if it's happy or sad. Yet, then you move on. You don't stay with any emotion for the rest of your life. And I understand that for some people it might sound harsh or disrespectful. I didn't see it that way at all. I actually saw that as that's the promise that we made for each other. I
Yeah.
do that out of love and respect for him and for us and for our boys. And the things that you do for your kids out of love, it doesn't need to include creating a happy life. And that's exactly what we promised each other.
Yeah. And
Mm,
that's a very interesting take. I like your perspective though, because
thank you.
I feel like a lot of people do kind of sit with the grief, you know, and maybe this is far fetched to say, but maybe a little too long. Or there comes a point where you do have to pick yourself back up. You do have to move forward. You do have to move. Not I don't like saying move on with life because it sounds like you're just
Mm,
kind of forgetting about it. But you know, changing the language is huge. Changing the
yeah,
dynamic of everything, it helps to move forward. And so I like
yeah.
what you said about all that, and especially the language. And I think back, and I'm like, man, I never know what to say. Like when
Mm,
somebody's like, "Oh, I lost somebody," I'm like, "Sorry for
yeah.
your loss" is the first thing that comes to mind.
I understand that because I did the exact same thing before I experienced it and before I was on the receiving end of that. I mean, sorry for your loss is not even the worst thing that you can say, to be honest, but it's those learned phrases, the my condolences. It becomes so meaningless to me anyway. Like, I think I'm still sort of scarred from being in the condolences line when my dad passed away and having to hear that literally hundreds of times because there were hundreds of people at the funeral, and everybody just walks past, says that line to you, hugs you, and moves on. And you feel so drained and empty after hearing that hundreds of times, and you don't want any more people to hug you. And I'm a hugger, like it was too much. It was just so, I don't know, the words forced and fake comes up. And I understand that nobody meant it that way. But when you are the one receiving it hundreds of times in a row, it changes things for you. You're not the first person saying that to me. And I I could feel anger come up in me at my dad's funeral because I just did not want to hear it one more time. I could feel the anger in me. And well, let's talk about anger for a moment because it's such a big emotion in grief.
Yeah.
To me, anger is such a cover-up emotion. I remember the anger I felt in at my dad's funeral. I don't remember once feeling angry after Rob passed away. Maybe because of all the work that I had done, maybe because of the different perspective that I had. But to me, anger covers up what's actually underneath, and when you lift that lid, when you look what's underneath the anger, there is often grief or frustration or sadness or emptiness or abandonment, whatever the emotions are. They're so important to address because if you don't look underneath, it becomes like this pressure cooker. If you don't lift the lid, it bursts out, it becomes
Yeah.
very vehement. It's like very explosive. And often it does come out in anger because it's easier to express. It's so much easier to just get angry and burst out than talking about the grief, the hurt, what's underneath. It's confronting. It is not comfortable. That's why it bursts out in anger. But when you do allow yourself to carefully look underneath that lid and address that emotion and give it, you know, allow it to be, it's valid that it's there, and deal with that emotion, the anger usually just dissolves like that because it's not necessary anymore. Whatever is underneath is addressed and given love and attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that, addressing the anger because I mean, it's almost purely psychological, and
Yeah.
I feel like if you get to the root of it, like, a lot of people don't like to get to the root of anything.
Yeah. That's true.
You get to the root of it and you're like, "Why am I even angry anymore?"
Mm,
And
yeah.
that's like we said, a lot of people don't like to do that with anger or grief or,
Yeah.
fear.
Yeah.
A lot of that
Absolutely, because
stuff
it's
that
scary. It's
Yeah,
uncomfortable. Yeah.
it is uncomfortable. How If you don't mind me asking, how long ago was this?
I don't mind at all, no. It was in June 2018, so we just had the 7-year anniversary.
Okay. And
Mm.
how were the early days? Like, how was it right when it happened?
Very raw, to be honest. Very intense because, as I said, our boys were 10 and 8, and I just looked at them and thought, wow, I remember how hard it was for me losing my dad because we were so close and they were really close to their dad. And watching them go through that and not even being combined as old as I was when I lost my dad, that was really intense for me. I feel there is no deeper pain than watching your children go through pain that you can't avoid for them.
Yeah.
That to me was the hardest part. It was harder than my own grief. To me, I almost felt like I don't wanna say I've been there, I've done that, because losing my dad and losing my husband is, two completely different pairs of shoes, it's you can't even compare that. It's a different relationship, it's a different pain, and I was at a different age and definitely at a different spiritual level of maturity, like, I have evolved over the years. I've learned so many tools, I've learned, different spiritual perspectives on that, and for me, when you say early days, um, a couple of weeks into Rob's passing, I had something that I now call a spiritual epiphany. I remember being upstairs in our in our bedroom, and all of a sudden I had this. Yeah, I can't find any other words than that. It was like a spiritual epiphany. It was a realization from a soul level that Rob and I have chosen this path on a soul level. This was
Yeah.
our soul contract, and that was part of it. And recognizing that gave me so much love, so much peace and acceptance in my heart. Yet it took me a while to really absorb this, to really own this, and even longer to be able to talk about that quite openly now, like in our conversation. Yet it has given me so much on my journey to healing to understand that. And with that peace in my heart, it felt so much lighter to deal with the grief and to help our boys through that, even though, my boys might not have had the same spiritual epiphany at that age because they were so young. They did not really understand any of that. Now they're at an age where we can start talking about these things. They're 15 and 17, and it's just incredible the conversations that have come out, even just through the last couple of months. And we go through waves, Sometimes
Yeah.
we are just a complete normal conversation like other people in other families. And other times we have those deeply spiritual conversations about life and death and dying and where dad is now and all these things that it gives me so much watching them grow on their journey and having different understandings. And so many people often say to me, your boys are so wise for their age. And although I know they mean well, absolutely, it's such a beautiful compliment to receive. There's also that little bit of bittersweet because I know what made them so wise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a bit of that. I I'm generally a person that looks on the bright side of life and on the positive things, but I can't help that every now and then there's that little bit of bitter side taste that comes with conversations like that because, yeah, they did have a very different upbringing and they did grow up without their dad from a very young age. So it definitely made them mature a lot quicker than other kids at that age.
Yeah. And there's always that bittersweet of like when you know you've gone through a lot and people are
Mm,
like, "Wow, you have so much wisdom," or "Wow, you're so mature," or "Wow,
yeah,
you have so much resilience." And it's like, well, you wonder why.
exactly. Yeah.
um but I think that is part of, what builds that character and what builds that maturity and that growth and everything is, you
Yeah.
know, the as much as it pains to go through the suffering of life and every event that you go through, it makes you hopefully a better person, but a stronger person.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Now through over the years, how have you and your boys, have you guys found happiness in
Oh,
that
yeah.
grief?
Yes. 100%. So I made a decision very, very early in our journey because Rob and I had actually planned to take the boys traveling around the world for an entire year. I still remember, we had the itinerary already like in pictures on our wardrobe upstairs. There were pictures
Yeah.
of Machu Picchu and pictures of like we had planned to have an endless summer for an entire year, to travel through South America, through Europe, through Asia, and then come back to Australia. And everything was more or less laid out in front of us. But he passed in June 2018, as I said, like half a year before we could have even taken off. Um, Beside the fact that it probably wouldn't have happened because of COVID, but that's a completely different story. But
Yeah.
when I looked at that itinerary and all the cutout pictures, I thought, I can sit there and go like, that's all over. We can't do this. And I would have certainly not traveled to South America with two little boys on my own. I would have certainly not been able to homeschool them for an entire year on my own whilst grieving. I thought it's not possible. So I instantly switched my thinking to what can I do? What can I do on my own with the two boys? And I thought, you know what? I'm going to travel around the world with them, but I'll do it in 2 months. That's all
Wow.
I can handle on my own. And I chose an itinerary. I chose destinations where I knew this is a journey that I can do on my own, like without a male partner, without the male protector on my side. Like, as I said, South America is probably not a country that you want to choose um, in that configuration. But I took him out of school for a few weeks, which didn't matter at all. You know, at that age, it is so not important. And school, of course, was completely on board with it. And so, as I said, he passed in June, and then in November, end of November, we took off till end of January. I took them to the Maldives. I went to the Canary Islands. I traveled through Europe with them. I asked the boys, is there anything in the entire world that you would like to do or see? And my older son was like, yeah, I want to eat snails in Paris. And I'm like, you want to have escargot? Where is that coming from? You're 10 years old, you know? And I'm like, all right, let's do it. So we
Whatever.
put Paris on the list and we ate escargot. It was disgusting. Sorry to say, any French people listening, it was absolutely disgusting. But I still remember it so fondly as a really bonding experience and a fun experience to do that. And yeah, we went through Austria because my family's there and had Christmas and New Year's there, and through Germany, and then to Sentosa Island. I took them to the Universal Studios and then back home to Australia. So we did, I don't know, 7 countries in 9 weeks or something like that. So it was really beautiful. And we still talk about that now. I knew that what I was doing was chasing happiness. And a lot of people sort of question my decision, as in, you know, she tried to run away from grief. You can't run away from grief, yet you can adjust your environment to make it easier. It is definitely easier to talk about things like that in your private pool overlooking the ocean in an overwater bungalow in the Maldives, where we had the conversation about, is Santa real and does the tooth fairy exist? Those conversations happened on the Maldives, you know, like out of all the conversations, I'm like, not this year, please give me one more year where they believe in Santa. But that conversation happened in a pool in the Maldives. And I thought, you know what, just bring it. It is easier to handle something in
Yeah.
such a beautiful environment than sitting at home and feeling the absence of your dad so much more, because this is our home and this is where we would have celebrated Christmas with him. So changing the environment, you're allowed to do that. People always tell you can't run from grief. No, you can't, but you can make choices that are healthier for you. You can make. I'm not telling everybody can travel through, the world and go to the Maldives. I understand that. We were very, very blessed and lucky to be able to do that. And you can do whatever it takes to make it easier for you. I don't know why people always have the opinion. I was like, you're not allowed to make it easier. Why not? When you cut your knee open, the first thing is you put some spray on, you clean the wound, and you take a painkiller. And I'm not talking of pills here. I just want to make that very, very clear. You know, I'm not saying take some pills or because that's the other thing. Most people, in particular in America, from what I heard from all the clients that I worked with in America, it's very common that when you are grieving, that you get prescribed antidepressants.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
very much against it, very much
Yeah.
against it. And I have not once in my life taken antidepressants. I understand there are cases where it's important, but in most cases, it's not necessary. And it is the go to thing. I
Yeah.
don't understand that. So I'm not a doctor. I don't want to claim that I have all the knowledge here about that, but I've worked in that space for long enough to know there are way healthier ways to help somebody in grief than antidepressants, because it just prolongs it. It just numbs it. It doesn't help at all. It doesn't heal it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you and I could probably go like a whole other show on
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
because
I didn't even
I know
want to
you
bring that
just
in, but yeah.
yeah, I know you just said you've spent time in that field. I was a personal trainer and nutrition coach and
Yeah.
uh partially a dietitian for a long time. So,
Mm.
all about the body, all about the mind,
Yeah.
I've been there and I see people do all that stuff. So we could
Yeah.
definitely go down that rabbit hole, but we're not going to. um
No. But
so
may I make one side note here,
yeah.
because we've now mentioned the antidepressants. Anybody listening to this, there is a really, really amazing piece that I would highly recommend to listen to. And I understand it's a 2-hour podcast, but it was absolutely incredible for understanding antidepressants in grief. Dr. Huberman actually has a podcast on that, and I can highly, highly recommend listening to it if you are in that space where you need to make a decision or need to understand more about it. Dr. Huberman explains it so well. So I just want to leave that there as a side note to go and find that. Dr. Huberman in Grief, Antidepressants and Grief, I think was the title of the show, but you'll find it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Mm,
I'm gonna have to go listen to that one.
yeah.
I have not heard it yet. So,
Yeah.
but I want to go back to one thing you said, not to bring back up the antidepressants and everything, but something that you said that struck me as well was all the people that were like, "Oh, are you making the right decision going on this trip and everything?" And you did say that at one point you realized that you were chasing happiness, um,
Mm.
a little bit, and
Yeah, I was. And I fully stand by it because I'm like, what's wrong with that? You know? Like, I love it. Yeah.
yeah, and but a lot of people, like, I'm a big believer in the magic behind travel, right?
Mm.
You know, as somebody who
Same.
is chasing that lifestyle, who is becoming a travel content creator and all this other stuff,
Mhm.
um, you know, I actually just a couple podcasts ago was talking to having the same conversation where, you know, before we learned how to farm, everyone in the
Mhm.
world was a nomad.
Yeah.
And I feel like deep down in our bones and in our brains, we don't like being in the same place or doing the same thing for a long time.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so that change, whether it's the environment or whether it's the roles you're playing, like I believe that, and that's why people love vacationing. You know, they work a job that they may love. They may love their job, but everybody still takes a vacation. Everyone still takes time off to do something else because I think that we humans need that change of
Yeah.
scenery. And
Yeah.
that's just one little thing to add in there, but I mean, I could go on about that forever. But
Yeah.
that's what struck me when you were talking about all the people being like, "Are you sure you're handling this correctly?" And um, you know, what do you think on the little snippet? I've heard this a million times, but what do you think on when somebody says everyone handles grief differently?
Well, it is absolutely true because to me, like, grief is just as unique as the person experiencing it. You know, everybody goes through that experience very differently. And for me, there are so many different factors that influence that. It's the who it even is in your life that passed. As I said, it was so different losing my dad or losing my husband. It's a completely different connection. It's a different relationship. It's a different position that I had, or I don't know if position is the right word, a different level of maturity, as I said before, you know, in your life, a different level of spiritual maturity. And all these factors, there are just some of so many factors that contribute to how you experience grief. What are your spiritual beliefs, even? You know, what happens after the
Yeah.
person dies? So if people
Yeah.
are in that space of, well, I'm an atheist, I don't think anything happens, they just go and they're gone. You know, that's heavy. I really feel for them because I personally don't understand how people can not believe that there's anything after everything that we know and that we've learned in that field. But, you know, if that's your belief, then it would be a lot harder and heavier to deal with grief than in my case. In my case, I still feel that connection. I have moments where I feel my husband around very, very clearly, and I have felt a lot of guidance in my life through my career choices, and of course also choices in parenting, where I thought, what am I gonna do with that, you know? And I'll literally say it out
Yeah.
loud, well, like, "Some help here, please," you know, or "That's your you take care of that, you know, I've done this here, you take care of that." I felt, I know and I often joke about it, but I really mean it. I felt very, very guided through this entire experience, and mostly I felt carried through it. I certainly had moments where I had breakdowns or where I felt, "Okay, this is too heavy now, I just can't do this." And my 2 magic words that I love adding to that is right now. And it's absolute legitimate to feel like that. I can't do this right now, you know, just give me a break. You take the break and then you carry on. It's like it's a choice that you make. I often hear people say, "Oh, it's so hard to be a single parent." And I'm like, I never had time to think about that. Is it hard or not hard? Like, well, what difference does it make to me? I am a single parent. I accept it wholeheartedly, and I do what I got to do, and I choose to do that with love, and I mean it, because everything you choose to do from a space of love becomes easier, becomes an absolute yeah, I want to do that rather than I have
Yeah.
to. There's my most favorite reframe in all of that, talking about language, is to switch your brain from I got to do this to I get to do this. This is I get to do this. I get to raise my kids. Rob didn't have that choice anymore. You know, like his time of parenting was over. His time on life was over, and to me, I get to do this. This is incredible. You know that I'm still here and that I have the privilege to raise our boys. So I don't see that from a space of this is hard. Like, of course I could, but what does that doesn't do me any good, you know, to come from that space. So I may as well embrace it. And I feel like everything we embrace just changes its form, its heaviness. It's, you know, my whole tagline is bringing lightness into grief. And that's all I do in my own life and in other people's lives. It really is quite easy to do that. I can't believe I'm saying that actually. It took me a long time to come from like, you know, this is easy to do that. It was a journey. It was nothing that flicked the switch and now life's easy. Absolutely not. But I've done a lot of work to get to that space to see from that perspective now.
Yeah. And that's a huge shift.
Mhm.
I don't,
Absolutely.
you know, most people probably don't recognize that shift or how big that shift is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when did you realize that you wanted to spread this shift to bring this to the world?
There was a really, I want to call it a really dark and heavy moment actually. And it was the same week of Rob's funeral. And I remember the funeral was midweek, it was on a Wednesday. And then on the Sunday in the same week, I walked our younger son down the aisle to his first Holy Communion. And that was hard. I
Yeah.
have to say, it's as weird as it sounds, that was harder than the funeral, because the funeral, it was a mental shift. I was prepared for that. I prepared for that. I prepared the entire funeral. I prepared the celebration of life that we did for him, you know, that so the focus was on celebrating his life, on happiness, on love. It was I would have never thought that the celebration of life for my husband would be such a beautiful and happy day, actually. You know, it sounds weird to say that, but there were 500 people in the room. There was so much love and so many beautiful and happy stories about him. There was laughter everywhere because there were so many beautiful stories told. And I remember a moment thinking Rob would have loved this, you know, the people coming together and sharing such beautiful stories. But then there was the first Holy Communion, and I remember walking down the aisle on my own, and all eyes were on us. And I had this feeling Rob was supposed to be here, you know, and I had tears running down my face, and I really tried not to cry, and it was so hard. Um, Walking down the aisle and seeing Jed look at me and, you know, just constantly checking in on me, and I tried to brave a smile for him. And when we walked back to the benches, I left him with my husband's best friend, who was his godfather, and I walked straight out of church and I burst into tears. And that night, I had a full-on breakdown. I remember the boys were brushing their teeth upstairs, and they were bickering over something, and whatever I said, it didn't solve it. And I remember that at some stage, it just burst out of me. I literally called up and was like, "Boys, I just need peace and quiet," you know, like that. It just burst out of me. And
Yeah.
I was like, wow. And the moment I said it, it was like this valve had opened. Something burst out and I could not close the valve anymore. I started saying that sentence over and over, and every time I said it, it got louder and more vehement and more explosive, and it turned into absolute primal screaming until I fell apart. I found myself on the floor in our kitchen, whacking kitchen cupboards, screaming that sentence over and over. And it was like this out of body experience. I watched myself falling apart, yet I couldn't remember falling on the kitchen floor. That's where I came to. And I remember thinking, somebody's gonna call police or the ambulance. I'm gonna be taken away from my kids. They're gonna, I'm completely losing my excuse me. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear here, but I'm
Yeah,
losing it
you're
here.
good.
It was really scary when it happened, and it was the only time that happened. I remember when I sort of came back into my conscious thinking, I was really scared that
Yeah.
that had happened without me being able to stop it. And then, of course, I was scared because the boys sort of witnessed it. They were upstairs, but I live in an open plan house. There was no door. They got the full force of it. And I walked upstairs and I had this conversation with them, a very deep and very raw conversation about what just happened. And I said, how you guys see Doreen, the school counselor? They were like, yeah. I said, I think I need to see somebody too. And my
Yeah.
older son said, I think that's a good idea, Mum. So that was roughly 3 weeks into Rob's passing. And I remember how horrible I felt, how guilty I felt. I felt like I had completely failed them as a mom to keep them safe, to keep them happy. And that moment triggered me to go and find somebody to help me through this. So I found a positive psychologist that was sort of in my realm already because I was a coach, and often when things were passed, what I could do as a coach, I would pass them on. I would refer them on to a positive psychologist. So I had her sort of in my network, but I'd never met her in person. And I gave her a call and I said, I need to work with you. And she gave me her emergency spot the next week, and the rest is history. We worked together for about 4 months, and in that, I know it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I believe that story was really, really important to share here, because when I sat in her office and I talked to her about this whole how heavy those expectations of society weighed on me, that how you're supposed to grieve, how you're supposed to fall apart. It's almost like society waited for me to have this breakdown. It was like, oh, there you go. See, no, she's grieving properly. She's losing
Yeah.
it. Sort of, that's what it felt like to me. And she just looked at me and said in her really soft and beautiful voice, she said, so what does grief mean to you, Marie? I sort of remember that. And to my own surprise, the first word that came up was empowerment. And I'm like, wow, I did not expect that word. I said, that's the first word that comes up. Isn't that bizarre? And she said, explain it to me. What do you mean? And I thought of that, this extreme power that came out in my breakdown. And I thought, imagine using that force to rebuild yourself rather
Mhm.
than just fall apart. And there is a lot of power in that. There really is a lot of power in that. There's so many raw emotions. So when you harness that in a way that you can allow yourself to heal, to be carried through that, to use that strength to help yourself, that would be so powerful. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? I think I need to write a book about this. And she said, I think you should. And that's what I did. That's what I did. I walked out of her office, and basically the week after, I started writing a book, and 5 weeks later, published my first book, Loving
Five
Life After
weeks.
Loss. Yeah. It
Wow.
was an absolute flow writing process because it was our story. I knew that story so well. I didn't have to think about it. It was literally just opening my heart and writing. And yeah, I published Loving Life After Loss uh, pretty much 3 weeks before we embarked on our journey around the world, and I published a book, and again, massive surprise. I did not expect that whatsoever. It landed on the top 100 bestseller list of Amazon Australia. And I
Wow.
remember seeing my name next to Michelle Obama's with her book Becoming. She had it on number 16 and I was on number 61. I'm like, hey, we're number buddies. It was like 1661. But, I just loved it. I thought, oh my God. And traveling around the world, I had this moment of, wow, I think I've got something the world needs. I can't believe that our story landed on the top 100 bestseller list. And that's basically the next step, where I knew I had to do something. I started a movement with the same title. I had it for 5 years. I helped roughly 5,000 people on the healing journey with this movement, with different healing journeys, programs, retreats, talks that I did. I wrote another couple of books and did a TEDx talk on redefining our image of a widow. It was very, very important for me to talk about labels and how we can look at things differently. Yeah, that's basically the journey in a nutshell. It was massive.
Wow.
Mm,
So you became an author, you became a speaker,
yeah. Yep.
became a coach, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if it like is it called a grief coach?
Yeah, people always need labels. I totally understand that. People always ask me, "So what is it that you actually do?" So you're a life coach? I'm like, "Well, yeah, that was my original training, but I feel like I've evolved from that quite significantly." I was already a coach when Rob passed away. I worked in mindset for about 7.5 years when Rob passed away. And then through my own experience, I just specified in a topic of grief, and my go to became how do I help people find their path back to happiness? Um, that's what I wanted. And I played around with those titles a lot, grief coach, happiness coach, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, I work very specified with people to help them through grief and allow themselves to heal and allow them to find joy and happiness in their life again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, would you say that what Rob said to you has helped you most on your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so, so grateful that we had this conversation. Like, who would have thought, when we had this conversation, that that would actually happen in our lives one day? Um, you always say nothing ever prepares you for that. And I'm sometimes even still tempted to say that. But in hindsight, when I look back, my entire life has prepared me to do what I do now. My upbringing, my childhood. I did not have the easiest childhood, and that's probably for another podcast. But everything that I walked through in my childhood made me more resilient. Losing my dad at the age of 20 made me more resilient. Made me realize what I did not want for my children to experience. I didn't want them to walk through that journey the way that I did. Um, Meeting Rob has prepared me to lose him in the weirdest possible way. But so one more thing that I want to talk about here.
Yeah.
I often talk about the hidden gifts in adversity. They're always there. There are always, always, always gifts in every adversity. It's up to us whenever we are ready to open our heart and mind to actually receiving them. And to me, when I look back, when we talk about hindsight, I feel that losing my dad at such an early age where I felt so unprepared to live my life without him being there has sort of given me the gift of living my life from a very different space of consciousness, as in being very aware of all the beautiful things that there are in life. And it has given Rob and I this, I call it was like the wedding gift from my dad, to live a
Yeah.
relationship where we were so present with each other, where there was not one single day that we spent with each other where we didn't tell each other how much we loved each other. And being so present and aware of the beauty in life and living our lives from that space. We were often seen as that couple, everybody was like, oh, you and Rob, you're still so in love after all these years and look at you. And we were still walking hand in hand when we could, when there weren't kids in between. But, there was this absolute, we were besotted with each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know how consciously I would have lived my life without going through the loss of my dad. So looking back now, I remember so many times when Rob said to me, two choices, babe. You've got two choices in life, you can live your life from this or from that perspective. And he was the one who taught me that concept. And boy, did I make some choices after he passed away. I made so many choices. People often feel like, oh, I didn't have a choice in that. Well, let's put aside the fact whether you did or didn't choose that from a spiritual level. Let's just park that for a moment and go from that perspective. Okay, I didn't have a choice in that. I didn't choose that my husband died. Let's go with that. Okay, but you can always choose how you respond to that. Do you see that as a moment of my life's over, or do you see that as a moment of my life will change significantly? And
Yeah.
how it will change is up to me. What I do with the boys is up to me. Whether I go and chase happiness or whether I sit here and wail in our sorrow is up to me. I set the example. I'm the one that they look up to now, as in, how do you deal with when life throws you a curveball? There are so many choices every single day. And often you hear moms like, well, I have to for my kids. You got to. As in, I get to do this for my kids. I choose to do this for my kids out of love. There are a lot of people who don't choose that, who do stay in their sorrow, who don't know how to get out of bed, who don't know how to get up and make a lunchbox for their kids. I chose to do those things because I wanted to. I wanted to show them how you can get up after something like that and choose life and choose love and choose happiness and choose joy. They are choices that you can make, and they're not always easy. Don't get me wrong, but there are choices to be made, and we choose how this defines us. We
Yeah.
absolutely do. Yeah.
Wow. That's really good. And I think that those hidden gifts in adversity could help a lot of people.
Mm,
I mean,
absolutely.
if people shifted their narrative, shifted their perspective, um, and really, like, this whole show has been about perspective shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So, and one of the big things I want to go back and touch on is you said that you found empowerment in your grief. Now,
Hmm.
for somebody listening right now who might be going through a loss, or who might be going, a loss of a relative or loved one, the loss of a job, a loss of uh,
Mm,
just change, in general. Someone who might be going through some sort of grief in the
hmm.
simplest way possible, because this is simply satisfied. How would someone empower themselves through the grief to find fulfillment, to find satisfaction?
Well, the simple question that I like to ask is always like, do you want to stay unhappy for the rest of your life? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. It's hard to admit sometimes because it's almost like, well, aren't I supposed to be unhappy? Aren't I supposed to be grieving for the rest of my life? Um, Often people feel like that's what they are supposed to do in that case. It's the society's expectation again. But when you ask somebody that simple question, do you want to stay sad for the rest of your life? The answer is always like, no, God, no. Why would I do that? So I just want to remind people of that. It is the question is that simple. I understand that it's not always that easy, but the question is that simple. Do you want to stay unhappy? No. Okay, so what would you like to do instead? Well, I want to be happy, of course, duh. So how can you create that? How can you create that? And I often start with that in my 7 steps program from grief to relief. My very first question is always like, how can we separate who you have lost from what you have lost? There's always that, okay, what do you attach to that person? For me, it was like Rob represented safety for me. When he was around, I always felt safe. He was my knight in shining armor. He was our
Yeah.
protector. He was a protector of our family. So my question was, how can I create that for me? How can I create safety? It will be different. It'll never be the same. And here's the thing. People always say, oh, my life will never be the same. No, it won't. How can it? Of course, it's not the same anymore. But whether that is a negative sort of almost death sentence for you, because then your life will be over, like you might still be physically living, but that's not living when you decide that your life's over through that. So the question is, what can you do to recreate that in a way that it suits your life now? And for
Mm.
me, there were little things that I had to do, like checking that my front and back door is locked before I go to bed. So I'm not laying in bed thinking, oh my God, could somebody come into our house in the middle of the night because I forgot to lock the door? So I check that diligently every morning, every night. And I pushed our bed in one corner because I felt more cradled in and I felt more cozy to have the bed in a corner rather than, that it's like that energetic safety. Like, how can you create that? How can you make your kids feel safe? We created little routines around safety, and um And it also meant that the boys slept in my bed with me. Luckily, we had a king size bed for the first 9 months. They were just glued to me, and we just slept in one big bed together for the first 9 months. They were so little. They needed that for safety, you know. So um, do whatever it takes for your situation or for your family to fulfill your needs. And the answers are often in the very, very simple and little things. People expect they're huge steps. They are not. They're always baby steps. They're always little things like the reframes, change it from I got to I get to, things like that. The language is hugely important around that. But always start with that simple question. Do you want to be unhappy for the rest of your life? No, you don't. Nobody wants that. And you're allowed
Yeah.
to be happy again. You're absolutely allowed to be happy. And I often suggest the role reversal for that. If you were to put yourself in your person's shoes, whoever passed away in your life, and you look at yourself, you just change your perspective. You look at yourself and ask yourself, what do you want for yourself? You know, in my case, if I look at ourselves from Rob's perspective, what do I want for Marie?
Hmm.
I want her to be happy. I want my boys to grow up happy. And that's how simple it is. Or if you want to simplify it even further, what would love do? That works for everyone, you know. It's a universal question. What would love do? And that has helped me a million times over.
Yeah. You gotta love the old role reversal.
Yeah,
helps it helps to give a new perspective shift when you could be like, would you do this, if your friend was doing it, and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
all
Mm.
that other stuff. Now, Marie, before I ask my final question, I just want to thank you for being on the show and bringing a lot of this to the show, because I don't grief is not really often talked about. Like I said,
That's true.
um, I never know what to say because most people just avoid it. Having the conversation of here's what you say,
Yeah,
here's how you deal with it, all this other
yeah.
stuff. For the longest time, I was like not afraid of death, but I didn't like being around death. And then I lost my grandpa and had to go through that, my own grief. Realized a lot of the things that you're saying now here. So it's still like I still don't know what to say, but I think that more like a lot of people do suffer from it, and I appreciate you bringing this message on here and bringing your message to the world.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, my final question is the theme of the show, and it's just one question. I ask everybody the same question. I love hearing the answers. The question is, what is one thing you wish you would have learned or you wish you would have known earlier in life?
Oh, that's such a loaded question. But the funny thing is, as soon as you asked me, the first thing that popped up was you're allowed to be happy. You know, we are so trained that, I don't know, people often live a life as like, it's got to be hard. You're supposed to be, feeling that heavy when you're grieving, all these things. So, okay, let me put it that way. My real favorite question that I often forget myself to ask myself is, what if it was easy? And
Hmm.
I think that is a question I would have loved to learn a lot earlier in life than I did. What if it was easy? And when you think of that in the space of grief, nobody teaches you that. Nobody teaches you that because grief is not supposed to be easy, right? Why not? So,
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I want to throw that in there. What if it was easy?
That's a really good one
Yeah.
because yeah, I mean that just changes everything.
Mm, yeah.
That's a really good answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm stumped on that one. Like you got me. I was like, okay. I'm thinking of all the stuff in the past week or month or life. I'm like, okay, what if I
Mm,
just asked, what if it was easy?
yeah.
Wow. Well, that was a really good answer, Marie. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else you want to tell the audience before we end the show today?
Uh, no, I think we've shared pretty much everything. But if you ever feel like you want to chat about that, book a chat with me. Seriously, I just want to have a quick conversation, and then you'll see where you take it from there. I always open that up to people. Just reach out, book a chat with me. Let's talk about where you're at and how I can help you.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, I'm going to put all of Marie's information in the show notes. So you'll be able to find all of her contact information, follow her on social media, get in touch with her, watch her TED
Yeah,
Talk, all of the
yeah.
above. So you'll be able to find that in the show notes. Thank you again, Marie, for doing this. And thank you for the message you bring to the world.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Of course. And for everybody listening, always remember to keep smiling and keep striving. And I'll catch you guys in the next episode.